the refugees, to protect their lives, I'd carry them in that building on my shoulders. That's the kind of guy John Bolton is. Ladies and gentlemen, the former United States Permanent Representative of the United Nations, John Bolton.
I want to thank Senator Torricelli in particular for that very warm introduction. It is a mark, I think, of the strength of feeling about the regime in Tehran that people who have had, let's say, a political difference or two come together so completely on this issue. And I welcome the opportunity to work with Senator Torricelli and all the other speakers that you've heard. And I think there's a real opportunity here to make a difference as a result of this incredible bipartisan spirit that he represents. You know, we're here today particularly because even as we meet, President Ahmadinejad is addressing the UN General Assembly. Now, some people say it's just shocking that somebody like Ahmadinejad speaks to the UN. Let me just say that this is not a bad day for the UN. This is not an aberration. This is not a mistake that needs to be fixed. This is the UN in operation. And it's precisely that unwillingness to make judgments about the character of the regimes that fill those chairs in the United Nations that have caused it so much trouble over the years. I've been very clear on my view of the regime in Tehran for quite some time. I believe it should be the declared policy of the United States to overthrow the regime and have the Iranian people pick their own government. Now, we can see from what has happened, from the regime's propaganda efforts, which are unceasing, what they try to do to cover up their basic nature. They have, as everybody here knows, held for over 2 years innocent American hitchhikers whose only offense was to get lost near the Iraq-Iran border. They have held these 2 young men, having released their colleagues some time ago. They've held them for purely political purposes. This is a grossly disproportionate punishment for an innocent offense. They've been made pawns in a much longer game. And when do they get released? When do they get released? The day before Ahmadinejad uses the UN forum for his own propaganda purposes. This is another demonstration of the character of the regime and the way it sees its place in the world. That's why, to help the legitimate representatives of the Iranian people who are willing to commit to a democratic post-regime government, to give up the quest for nuclear weapons, to abandon the support of international terrorism, that should be American policy. And that's why I have been concerned, as have many others, about the continued listing of the MEK as a foreign terrorist organization. Now, as Tom Ridge said, this designation is not a matter of somebody's opinion. It's not whether you like the MEK or not. It's whether the MEK or any other organization meets the statutory test to be listed. And the tests are very clear. Carrying out terrorist activities or having the capacity or intention to carry out terrorist activities. The uncontradicted testimony of officers of the American military who worked with the MEK before the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, who were there in Camp Ashraf during America's participation in the post-regime activities, and officers of the highest rank in our military, has been uniform that they saw no evidence of terrorist activity, intention, or capability. To the contrary, Hugh Shelton, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has commented eloquently on the help that the MEK gave to our military before the overthrow of Saddam. And this has been repeated over and over again. Moreover, Furthermore, it's beyond question that the initial decision to list the MEK as a foreign terrorist organization was undertaken in the late 1990s as an effort to make a political concession to the regime in Tehran to get discussions going about the nuclear weapons program. This is a fundamentally illegitimate use of the foreign terrorist designation. I believe that the chips have to fall where they may. Let's put all the facts on the table. Let's put on every fact we know about the MEK or any other organization, and let's see what the facts show. And that really brings me to the fate of the people of Camp Ashraf. I remember very well serving in the State Department at the time when Saddam Hussein was overthrown, when our military came up on Camp Ashraf. And there was concern on the part of some, there was uncertainty, there was lack of familiarity with what exactly it was and whether or not it would pose a threat to our troops. You can understand the highest concern of our top commanding officers in Iraq was that our troops not face threats. And so there was very careful examination of Ashraf, of the inhabitants of Ashraf, what their capabilities were. Everybody in the camp was interviewed. There were no weapons left in the camp. And for all the time of the American military presence there, they were under American protection, and nobody dared interfere with them. And during that entire period of time, as I've said, there was simply no evidence of any questionable activity. Now, we made the decision as the United States that the people of Ashraf should be granted protected person status as refugees under the 4th Geneva Convention. There's no doubt that determination was correct. There's no doubt as well that the United Nations should follow that objective and has acknowledged that objective. And there's no doubt in the transfer of power from the Coalition Provisional Authority to the democratically elected government of Iraq that they too acknowledged that the people of Camp Ashraf were protected persons and entitled to assistance and protection. So I think the United States has made a solemn commitment to these people, these residents of Ashraf. The United Nations has made a commitment, and the government of Iraq has made a commitment too. It is a disgrace that the government of Iraq has fallen sufficiently under the influence of the regime in Tehran that it allowed the recent attacks and their tragic and mortal outcomes, as well as earlier attacks on the people of Camp Ashraf. And I think it's a regrettable failure on the part of the United States government that we haven't followed through on the solemn commitment that we made, and that we're not pressing the United Nations to follow through on its commitments and obligations. If there's any message we can send to the world leaders who are here this week, but particularly to our own government in Washington, it's that we expect that our humanitarian concern for the people of Ashraf is going to be upheld, and that the ability of the regime in Tehran to pressure them, to harass them, indeed to seek their elimination entirely is something we're simply not going to accept. This is a moral commitment as well as a political and legal obligation by the United States, and I don't think we should be afraid to say it loudly and say it clearly, to say it right outside the State Department, as perhaps many of you did a few weeks ago, and to keep pressing until we get our government to do the right thing.